be spotted. The guys had worked thus far. Several of the gaunt individuals who inhabited the building had been and gone during the course of the day and hadn't given him a second glance. But of John Sagan there'd been no sign. Heck knew that because, from where he was slumped, he had a good vantage along the passage, and number 36, the door to Sagan's flat, which stood on the right-hand side, hadn't opened once since he'd come on duty that lunchtime. The team knew Sagan was in there. Officers on the previous shift had made casual walk-bys and had heard him moving around, but he was yet to emerge. Heck was certain he would recognize the guy, having studied the photographs carefully beforehand. Purely in terms of appearance, Sagan really was the everyday Joe. Somewhere in his mid-40s, about 5'8", of medium build, with a round face and thinning, close-cropped fair hair. He usually wore a pair of round-lensed gold-rimmed spectacles, but otherwise had no distinguishing features, no tattoos, no scars. And yet, ironically, it was this workaday image that was most likely to make him stand out. In his efforts to look the part-time clerk he actually was, Sagan favoured suits, shirts, ties, and leather shoes. But that wasn't the regular costume in this neck of the woods. Far from it. And yet this was only one of many contradictions in the curious character that was John Sagan. For example, who would have guessed that his real profession was torturer for hire? Who would have known from his outward appearance that he was a vicious sadist who loaned his talents to the underworld's highest bidders, and performed his unspeakable skills all over the country? Heck wouldn't have believed it himself, especially as the Serial Crimes Unit had never heard about John Sagan before, had the intel not come from Penny Flint, who was one of his more trustworthy informants. She'd even told Heck that Sagan had a specially adapted caravan called the Pain Box, which he took with him on every job. Apparently this was a mobile torture chamber, kitted on the inside with all kinds of specialist devices ranging from clamps, manacles, and cat-o'-nine-tails to pliers, drills, surgical saws, electrodes, knives, needles, and, exclusively for use on male victims, a pair of nutcrackers. To make things worse, and apparently to increase the sense of horror for those taken inside there, its whole interior was spattered with dried bloodstains, which Sagan purposely never cleaned off. Penny Flint knew all this because, having offended some underworld bigwig, she herself had recently survived a session in the Pain Box, if you could call it surviving. When Heck had gone to see her in her Lewisham flat, she'd been on crutches and looked to have aged 30 years. She'd advised him that there were even medical manuals on the shelves in the Pain Box to aid Sagan in his quest to apply the maximum torment, while its central fixture was a horizontal X-shaped cross on which the victims would be secured with belts and straps. Video feeds of each session played live on a screen positioned on the ceiling overhead so that the victims were forced to watch in close detail as they were brutalized. As he waited there on the semi-derelict corridor and took another swig of meths, Heck recollected the initial reaction back at the Serial Crimes Unit, or SCU as it was officially known in police circles, when he'd first broken the story. Strictly speaking, a freelance torturer operating inside the underworld wasn't entirely within their normal remit, but it was anyone's guess how many people this guy had maimed and or murdered. It was way too tempting a case to simply hand over. Even so, there had been understandable doubts expressed. Why haven't we heard about this guy before? DC Shauna McCluskey wanted to know. Shauna had grown increasingly cynical and pugnacious the longer she'd served in SCU. These days she never took anything at face value, but it was a fair question. Heck had asked the same of Penny Flint when he'd been to see her. The primary explanation, that Sagan was an arch-pro and that those he was actually paid to kill were disposed of without trace, was plausible enough. But the secondary explanation, that he'd mostly tended to punish gangland figures who'd betrayed or defied their bosses, and so those who were merely tortured and released again would be unwilling to blab, was less so. Contrary to popular belief, the much mythologized code of silence didn't extend widely across the underworld. But then Penny Flint had been the proof of that. From what she'd told